So let's start by talking about why mail. A lot of people assume that digital has killed direct mail, but direct mail is actually still a really huge driver of nonprofit revenue. And many of us face pressure from board members and colleagues who think that we should focus our efforts on digital fundraising tactics because it's free, but mail is still a channel that's very much worth investing in. And for example, at Best Friends, the typical donor is a female in her 50s or 60s, and she's someone who's still very responsive to the mail. She is paying her bills through the mail, she's corresponding with loved ones through the mail, she's donating through the mail. So it's important that we continue to correspond with our core donor through the method of communication that they prefer. And if executed correctly, most donor mailings are profitable. That is not acquisition. Direct mail acquisition it's an investment. It does cost you more money than it will raise, but with mailings to your constituents, they tend to be profitable. They also can drive donations to multiple channels. So you'll want to include a URL in every single mailing that can send people online if they would prefer to make their donation online. A lot of people love to receive things in the mail, read about it, feel it, touch it, but then go online and make their donation that way. And direct mail is still a very strong driver of new donor acquisition for most organizations. Another benefit is that mail is really easily trackable, and it allows you to keep closer tabs on your results and engage more effectively with your donors. Whereas relying on revenue streams like Facebook, for example, you would lose the ability to keep track of your donors. And we're going to talk about tracking a little later.
Hey, Carly, this is Barb. I just want to add a couple comments there. So just a point of clarification, acquisition in the mail refers to mailing to people who have not yet donated. So we're trying to acquire new donors in the mail. We typically do that by buying lists or renting lists from other organizations, just to make sure everybody understands what we're referring to there. And at Best Friends, direct mail is still the strongest channel through which we acquire new donors. Digital is starting to catch up, but the number of new donors acquired is still probably 2/3 through mail and 1/3, or getting closer to 40%, I think, through digital.
Thanks, Barb. So we know it can be overwhelming to know where to even start. You might just be a single development team of one person. You might be volunteer run. We know it's difficult when you don't have the resources like an organization like Best Friends. So sitting down with your budget is a good place to start. You can do this in Excel, and you start by just building out your expense and revenue budget for the whole year. And this will help you determine how many mail touches you'll need to send in order to hit your goals. I'm going to share, Raya rather will share a sample of this. We'll have a few sample documents that you can play with that we'll share after this webinar. Just a heads up, I know this is a little hard to read, but if you have the data available, we recommend looking back at your past results and digging a little deeper to determine metrics like your average gift and your response rate, so the percentage of people who received the mail that actually responded, and this will help immensely with your budget planning. So if you're just getting started with direct mail, or if you don't have that data, then you can just use industry averages. And there is a fundraising plan workbook with those industry averages in there that you can use to build out your goals, and that's another thing we'll share with you. So I'm having trouble transitioning. There we go. So we highly recommend building out a production calendar for the whole year. This will drive your whole direct mail program. And again, we'll have a sample of this that we'll share with you. You'll start by sitting down and reviewing your current process, if you even have a process, but that's where I would recommend to start, and just kind of look at what your pain points are. Bottlenecks in the creative review process are a really common one. So you can sit down, look at the process if there is one, and sort of reimagine something that will work smoothly for your team or for yourself. And creating a production process will help you define roles and responsibilities. We recommend having one person who's in charge of making sure that your deadlines are hit, because you can't let even one deadline slide. If you miss that copy due date, for example, your art's going to come in late, it'll get to the mail house late, it'll mail late, there's that whole domino effect. So highly recommend having a production person in charge who can see through to keep everybody on task. And this is an example of our internal process at Best Friends. So this is sort of something, I would recommend something similar to this. I start by just myself sitting down with a blank Word document and I build out an outline for the mailing. And I might not even know at that point what the theme or the story of the appeal will be, but I just want to start an initial plan. Who do we want to send it to? And it might even just be you're starting with questions so that when you do meet with your team to do the creative kickoff, which is the second part, you know how to drive the conversation and what decisions you need to be making about this appeal. Do we need more than one version? What audience are we speaking to? What's a good story to tell? What's the call to action, or what are we asking them to do? How much are we asking them to donate? Try to figure out as much of that as possible ahead of time. Then we have our creative kickoff where we brainstorm. We have a writer and we talk about stories and we figure out what this appeal is actually going to look like. Then a few weeks out after that, the draft copy is due, and then we go through sort of a cyclical process of reviewing, doing feedback. We approve the copy. It goes to art, same sort of thing. We review, provide feedback, approve the art. It goes to the print shop. All the money comes in. And then really, really important, once that money starts, you don't even have to do this. Well, you're going to do this kind of in two parts. We recommend once the mailing starts to kind of hit homes and you're getting feedback from donors, to sit down and sort of debrief and document what went right, what went wrong, because you're always learning and improving. And so if you do the same appeal next year, you can remember, hey, we forgot to do XYZ, or the mail shop made a mistake on this. We need to make sure they don't do that again next year. Really, really important to document. On to Barb.
Great. So how do we go about writing an appeal? Before I launch into this, I want to give credit to Elizabeth Doyle. She's our senior writer here at Best Friends. And during conference each year, she usually does a great presentation about writing an appeal and what's important to focus on and how it should evolve, and sort of the way in which we should be speaking and engaging to our constituents. So I want to credit her for these slides here, which I will go ahead and walk you through. So creative writing is the art of using words to invoke emotions, and that's exactly what we want to do with our constituents. We want to bring them into the story and make them love the animals, love the cause, just deepen their commitment to our cause. So the best fundraising marketing technique is to tell them a story. This is true universally for nonprofits. It's going to create that relationship between the reader and the organization, and it creates an emotional memory. So people are going to remember not the statistics about your organization, but more so the feeling that they get when they're reading about the impact that you're able to bring about. So every appeal begins with a story. And when you're starting to identify your story, think about what it is you want to represent in the story. We're going to need stories in a lot of different places: the website, marketing and magazines, newspapers, books, public stories, stories to our constituents, to raise money, or to steward those relationships and keep people updated about impact and just successes. So, what's a good story to tell? So, it's easy to fall into the trap of writing about the 873,000 cats you've saved. That doesn't create that emotional connection. We really need to focus in on one name, one face, a story about a single animal, or a single mom cat with kittens, something like that. This is the basis for the story that's going to create that emotional connection. So we have some great examples in here, which I'll read through for you. Last week, 1,328 cats were admitted. 423 of them had FIV, while 219 had feline leukemia. A total of 146 were adopted. So that's not so memorable. I bet if you closed your eyes, you could not read that back to me. But if we say Muffin arrived last week with FIV and feline leukemia without a friend in the world, but today she was adopted into a happy home. In fact, she's just one of 1,328 cats whose lives we saved, thanks to you in the past 7 days. That obviously creates that connection. So here's the pyramid technique that Elizabeth talks about and teaches all of us. So we want to grab them with one animal. After he was hit by a car, Sebastian came to our vet clinic for healing, and now he's prancing into a new home. Then we mention more animals that have been helped. In fact, he's just one of 243 animals with life-threatening injuries who counted on us last year. Then we talk about the rest of the animals that have been helped. And of course, we also run a comprehensive spay-neuter program that's helping to save thousands of lives, one Sebastian at a time. We bring it full circle back to that original animal. Why do we tell success stories? This is really tempting. Help, we're out of food. Our electricity's been shut off and the landlord's threatening to evict us. I'm so sorry to be writing you again, but if anything, the situation has gotten even more desperate since my last note. We've done everything we can, but if we don't get more funds immediately, who knows what'll happen to the animals? P.S. What you see in this photo is all that's left of our administrative building. We think the neighbors are saboteurs. So please send money. It's urgent. Obviously, people are going to send money, but is that what we really want to be putting out into the world? The problem with this kind of desperation, which you see so predominantly in the animal welfare space, is that you can't keep sending this kind of plea over and over again. It basically says you're a failure, or you're a victim of circumstance and you have no control over your situation. Instead of saying that, we'd rather say that we're a good investment. Make the reader want to give you money to help animals without undermining your message of competency by saying that the sky's falling every time you have a request. It just makes you seem like an irresponsible organization that either can't manage money well or can't manage situations well. So at Best Friends, we have additional reasons for telling success stories and keeping our message very positive. One is our brand. That is unique to Best Friends. We are always telling the happy ending. It doesn't mean you don't touch on some difficulty in an animal's life, but it's not the main, theme. Desperation or despair is not what we want to put out into the world. We want to create positive relationships and create that emotional memory that makes people feel good. We also do not want to do anything that damages the reputation of the animals we serve. We don't want to depict them as damaged or victims or undesirable. We want to perpetuate an image of them being very desirable and just in a situation where they need a home and find themselves homeless. And we also want to increase trust from a distance. We want to constantly reinforce the message that we know how to solve this problem. We can help the animals. We know how to do that, and you can trust us with your investment. So this is what we don't put out. Animals are suffering, and we're miserable, and you should be too. This is what we want people to feel. Animals are being helped, and we're thrilled, and you should join us. So there are sad parts in almost every story that we encounter. So it's not that we can't touch upon them. We just do it in a delicate way. So the not as good version says, Bambi was hit on the head and then left in a dumpster. People do that kind of thing all the time around here, and it's only getting worse. Join us to help stop it. A better way to phrase that would be, Bambi must think he woke up in heaven. He was hit on the head and left in a dumpster. But then something miraculous happened. You brought him back from the brink of being a part of this organization. Today he's alive, snuggled up in a blanket and having his little chin rubbed. He's going to be just fine. And there are more Bambis out there, more animals who think it's all over, and together we'll continue to help them. So to get started, you're going to need to collect a story. And instead of just going around and asking for stories, it's better to start with an idea of the type of program work you'd like to represent. Unless there are lots of different good stories to choose from, and you might have multiple program areas that you could talk about. But typically, we have an idea that we want to talk about TNR, or we want to talk about, transport. Oftentimes, we start with a theme, and then we solicit stories that support that and can create a great story and that emotional memory to go along with that area of program work. So be careful when you start to solicit some story ideas. You're going to get information about an animal that somebody wants to see adopted, but that may not necessarily be the animal that represents the story you want to tell. You're going to get a suggestion about a story of an animal that a staff member adopted. Again, staff hoarding isn't always the best story to go out with. You're going to get someone who suggests you go out with an announcement about the new executive coordinating director of networking. Again, that's you tooting your own horn. That's not what constituents are going to create an emotional connection with. And then you'll get somebody else that says, as long as you're writing a fundraising appeal, could you mention our rubber ducky sale and our adopt one and get 57 free promotion? Again, not key to the message that you're trying to focus on in a fundraising appeal. So try to be careful about incorporating stuff like this into your appeals. And what if you don't rescue animals? You may be doing a lot of different program work that isn't direct intake, but if your work touches the lives of animals, you have a story. So you can find that cat who had litter after litter after litter of kittens and was nearly dying until your trap, neuter, return program spayed her, and she gained her life back and is now living happily in, Grandma Susie's home, sitting in front of the fireplace. So where do we begin when it's time to sit down and actually start writing? So don't focus inward on you as an organization. Nobody wants to get something that praises you. That's not what they're going to be inspired by. They want to be recognized by you as enabling your good work, but this isn't the time for internal staff accolades. You need to be able to brag without taking credit. Thank the reader, not yourself. So the reader has enabled you to be able to do this good work. So on the left, this is not really a story about an animal. One night, our volunteer coordinator, Jackie, was driving into town when she noticed a bundle of fur on the road. She hit her brakes and discovered it was a shivering black cat. She wasted no time getting a blanket from her truck. This is a story about a volunteer coordinator named Jackie, not about a cat. The story on the right is a story about an animal. One night, Malcolm the cat was shivering by the side of the road. He had just been hit by a car and couldn't move. But then there were headlights coming toward him and a truck pulled up. Before he knew it, he was wrapped in a blanket and on his way to the safety of our facility. There, the focus is on the animal, not Jackie. Remember your theme. So the animal story is the plot, but the theme is the reason you're telling it. So after someone reads a story, do you want that person to donate? consider adopting an animal, become a volunteer, get on the mailing list, or simply have a more positive impression of your organization and steward the relationship. Think about the theme constantly as you write. Ask yourself, does this sentence add to that theme? How about this one? Keep the question on one side of your brain while the other side tells the story. Typically, if you're writing an appeal, you're trying to motivate a person to give. Donating is an impulse act, and that you need to give them a reason to want to do that. So make sure everything you're writing builds up to that. And remember your image or your brand. It's what makes people support you, not just this time, but next time too. So make sure you're always upholding your image with every single correspondence, or you risk the success of your next appeal. As I said at the beginning, you're creating an emotional memory and a feeling about your organization with every communication. People aren't going to respond to every single piece of communication they receive. It takes multiple touches, and each touch that they receive from you is building up to create that motivation. So even if they're not going to donate this time, you're still building that feeling, and you want to continue to add positive experience to that memory. Position your brand as you go along. Always make it clear what's special about you, what makes you different. And the narrator should know your brand intuitively without having to stop and think about it. So make sure the person writing the appeal is intimately familiar with your brand. They should know your organization and the spirit and soul of your organization so well that you shouldn't have to remind them how to represent the brand. Include emotional details. So we're trying to recreate that emotional memory, and details add the color and the heart to that experience. So people don't recall facts very well. They remember how they feel about you. So an emotional image of your organization needs to be developed as you're writing. Remember, you're building a relationship with every word you write, and that should persist over time and continue to build. Make sure you're speaking a layman's language, basically. So avoid insider jargon. It's very tempting for us to say TNR and lots of jargony acronyms. But remember, your audience isn't in the rescue space. Don't assume that they are. Make sure you're not speaking a language make sure you're not speaking a language that's clear to you and your colleagues, but is a different language to the other people who are receiving it. So make sure you say found homes for animals instead of adopted out. Say gave a ride to instead of transported. Say trapped, neutered, and returned them to their outdoor home rather than TNR'd. Plain language takes longer, but it's clear and more personable, and there's no worry about ambiguity. And avoid used car salesmanese. Don't say things like act now or help needed or it's a desperate situation or anything like that. People associate this terminology with scams. We want to create a sense of urgency and motivate people to act, but we don't want to position it as a crisis. So it can be effective to set a goal and a deadline. So say something like, if we raise X dollars by X date, we'll be able to save the 300 kittens we expect to take in this season, something like that, so that they understand there is some urgency, but you're not trying to sound like the desperate barker. So here's an example from Elizabeth. Our sustainable strategic initiative utilizes game-changing deliverables to push the envelope and add value as we double down proactively moving forward. What the heck does that mean? Corporatese is a dialect your reader may not speak, so why are you speaking a different language? It's emotionally insensitive, so it prevents closeness, which is contrary to what we're trying to do. And we don't want to put a wall between us and the reader with a foreign dialect that creates distance. We want to pull them in with warm and simple language. There are some structure issues to keep in mind when you're developing a fundraising appeal. People are not going to read every word, most likely. On any appeal that goes out to a constituent audience, you might get 5% of people who respond, 95% of people who don't respond. You're going to get a far fewer percentage of people who are actually reading every single word that you've written. So you want to make it easy for people to take in the content quickly. You want to use short paragraphs. You want to allow lots of white space. Use good grammar, but simple words, so you can speak to people with varying levels of education while sounding educated yourself. Don't say, he came up to Jane and I. And some people might not realize that that's not a proper sentence. So it might behoove you to have somebody else read and edit your content before it actually goes to print. Even the best of us who feel like our grammar is decent, we have moments where we've looked at a page 27 times and errors no longer jump out at us. So it's always great to have someone you trust serve as an editor and try to catch stuff like this. So let's look at a whole appeal and point out some things that we just want to call out that are important and you want to keep in mind as you're getting your mail together. So top left is the outer envelope. We always include a teaser, that little statement that says here, let's make history, let's make the country no kill. You want to have a statement that gives them a hint of what's inside and entices them to open it. A match challenge always lifts response. So we also added your gift will be matched. We use matching campaigns twice a year here at Best Friends, typically at least once a year at the holiday season. But if we are able to gather together a matching fund appeal in the spring also, we try to, because it's really motivational for someone to know that their gift is being matched by some other entity and can go twice as far. When you use pictures of animals, use pictures that have direct eye contact if it's just a picture of the animal. So you can see this animal has great eye contact and you feel like you want to get to know moose better. You'll see in the bottom left corner of the back of the outer envelope, we add the name of the animal. So it's very clear to the person receiving this that this is an actual animal we've helped and this is an original photo. We don't use any stock photos in our mail development. Unlike many other animal welfare organizations, you see stock photos all over the place. It feels very impersonal and it just builds a greater level of trust when they know that the animals they're seeing are animals that they have helped save. And here's a letter. This letter is longer than ones that we usually would put out. Usually we keep our letters to about 2 pages, a front and back side. This is a special appeal because it's a matching gift opportunity. And we had a lot to say, lots of exciting news to share. But it all started with Aiden's story. So you can see Aiden is there with good eye contact. The name is right on there. And the Johnson box there at top left says, what does life-saving look like? Well, it has a tail that wags, whiskers that wiggle, and soft marshmallow toes. Sometimes it has curly fur, and every so often it even has a snaggletooth or two. So you can see right there, we're starting to create that emotional memory right at the start. And we're calling out the match challenge, making sure they remember that. Use short paragraphs. Some of these paragraphs are a little bit longer than we usually use, but typically they are quite short. We use lots of white space. We use bolding and color and blocks to call out specific points that we want to make sure the person who is skimming is going to pick up on. The picture of Aiden on the second page shows a wonderful human-animal bond. That's beautiful. And we're also using lots of bullets and other bold and special effects to pull out the things that we want people to gain. Even if they're just skimming through reading bold, they're still going to understand the gist of this appeal and the message that we're conveying. And then you always reiterate and summarize in the PS. You're going to summarize your call to action, because if a person reads nothing else, they're going to read the PS. So here's the reply device and the call to action. It's very simple. Donating is the only call to action here. And everything that's in pink on this page is variable text. So for example, these boxes that have XX, these are going to be based on their giving behavior to previous campaigns, the gifts that they've given in the past. So typically we have this ask string be one time the last gift, or largest gift, or average gift within a certain period, or 1.5 times or 2 times. So it's dynamic text. It's as customized to the donor's experience as we can get. And on this particular one, we did ask the person to contribute your gift by June 1st to contribute to the match. So hopefully that will motivate people to act quickly.
And also wanted to mention, you'll want to include a URL on your reply devices too. We use vanity URLs so we can track them to the particular campaign. If you don't have that tool available, just send them to your website. But that way, if someone doesn't want to send in a check, they will be motivated to go right online and make a donation there.
So here's a quick summary of what we've talked about. Before you sit down at the keyboard to write, get in touch with your narrator, be aware of your image, and be sure of your intent. So make sure you are representing someone who knows the organization intimately and can present that brand and image in a positive way, and understand what's the purpose of you writing this story. What is the call to action? What action do you want the donor to take when they feel inspired by this story? Tell me a story about an animal you've helped. Develop the animal as a character and make the reader care. Position your brand and your emotional image as you go along. Be sensitive to your reader, watch your language, use your voice, and build that relationship. Create that emotional feeling and leave them with positive emotions about your organization. Empower me as a reader to help more animals. Make me feel hopeful. Tell me your organization is a good investment and that by giving to you, I too can help. I can bring positive change through your organization. Don't forget to ask for money, and don't forget the PS. Use short paragraphs with succinct thoughts and lots of white space. Create a clear call to action and only one call to action. Don't confuse them with lots of information about, oh, if you want to volunteer, you could go to this web page, or if you want to, participate in this walk, you can go here. You're going to distract the person, and they're going to forget why they were there, and they're going to forget to donate if there are too many distractions. And most important of all, mean what you write. Be truly authentic. and bring the person in and make them feel like part of your organization.
All right, so once you have this amazing, compelling appeal written, how do you know who to send it to? We recommend using a process called segmentation, which is just the process of taking a larger group of constituents and breaking them into parts or segments for the purpose of message customization and analysis. Basically, it allows you to send the right message to the right people at the right time. We will be delving a lot more deeply into this topic. Barb and I will be presenting a pre-day workshop the day ahead of the Best Friends Conference. So if you're going to the conference and you're not signed up, highly recommend signing up. We'll be talking a lot more about segmentation that day. And there's also a segmentation 101 presentation on the digital community that you can reference. So there are many different ways you can segment your donor file. The most tried and true method is called RFM, and that stands for recency, when was their last gift, frequency, how often have they donated to you, and monetary value. What is their last gift amount or their highest gift amount or their average gift amount? You could use any of those. And one of the benefits of RFM segmentation is it's really easy to build your segments out once you have some clean data to work with. So this is a good place to start. Some benefits of segmentation, two main purposes. One is that it allows you to track your results in more detail, which informs your future strategy. And then you can target your messaging better once you learn from your results. And that allows you to foster that deeper connection with your donors. So segmentation can save you money while helping you raise more money. So with the tracking, you'll use something, if you're not already familiar, called source codes. And this is just a string of characters and or numbers that you'll print that'll be unique to each mailing. You'll print it on the reply form. And that way, when the donations come back in, you record them with that code, and then you can track it. You know exactly which appeal triggered that gift. And that targeting allows you to customize your future messaging. So you can analyze which segments respond to particular appeals or message types, and then refine your future appeals to better target different types of donors or messages that your donors seem to like better, or stories. And also while leaving out those segments that are costing you money. So over time, you'll see that some of those lower dollar, lower frequency donors are just not responding there, and you're actually losing money on those segments. Well, you can cut them out of future appeals or just send them fewer appeals. That is another huge benefit to segmentation. And generally speaking, donors who donate more frequently, who have donated more recently, and who have donated more money are more likely to respond, and to respond with the most generous gift. And lastly, you're going to want to track your results in more detail beyond just how much money did we raise. And I know it can be difficult to find the time to dig into these numbers, but doing so will pay off in the long run. You can just do this in Excel, and you can see here, this is your source code that tells you which appeal it was. And we recommend tracking things like your response percent, how many people who received it actually donated, the total number of donations, of course, your total amount raised, and then your average gift and your net, because that's always really important. Mail is, costly. You want to make sure you're actually netting a good amount of money. So you can do this all in Excel. If you want to move from Excel into a CRM, if your organization hasn't already done so, there is a recording that Mila Burns did on finding a CRM that we can link you to. Very helpful presentation. And one really beneficial thing about these results is you can sit down. What we do is we sit down quarterly and we have campaign reviews. So I mentioned earlier how you will have that debrief shortly after the mailing hits. And then once, it takes months, they call it snail mail for a reason. 3 or 4 months down the line, you finally have most of your results in, and you can sit down and look back in more detail. And we like to do it quarterly and look at everything that went out at that quarter. So we can pull those results out and take a closer look. And then this helps us with future planning and brainstorming.
So with direct response fundraising, and you're sending out your appeals in the mail, it really is an iterative learning process. You're never going to perfect this, so don't try. You just want to get better and better and better over time. And you're going to learn as you go along. So you might want to test, oh, is a dog appeal going to do better than a cat appeal? Let's try it. Send it out, split your audience, send both versions, analyze your results, learn from that, and then incorporate that learning into your next iteration of attempt. There are lots of things that Carly and I test as we're doing one mail appeal after another. We're testing, different photos. We're testing cats versus dogs. We're looking to see if we know what people are interested in more so than something else. Do we know that they're dog lovers? Do we know that they're cat lovers? Can we target their communication based on their interests? Do transport stories do better than TNR stories? Or do we know what people are motivated by on a personal level? Can we adjust our approach based on that? We adjust ask strings. So like I talked about earlier, we might have an ask string that's based on last gift or largest gift or average gift in the last 18 months. We might try sending an ask string that's one time their last gift, 1, 1.5, 2. Or we might try 2, 2.5, 3. We might try ask strings that have decimal places that are not even, which usually doesn't work. Usually you want even dollar amounts, by the way. There's just so much you can test. Usually a colored signature, a blue signature garners a better response rate than a black signature on a letter. Photos with eye contact work better than photos without. There are lots and lots of things that you can test, and you should be testing. One thing that we've done in the last couple of years is something called social proof. And on some of our reply devices, you may see a statement that says, animal lovers in your area tend to give this amount. That amount is based in fact. We have some dynamic charts that we use to drive that information. And we have learned that if you can reference what others are doing, people are more inclined to do what others are doing. So, without that kind of social proof statement, you might be getting a $22 average gift. But if you add that social proof statement, suddenly your average gift can go up to $26. There's usually a trade-off between response rate and average gift. Usually if you get a higher response rate, you have a lower average gift and vice versa. So there are lots of different levers to play with in this process. And you should be adjusting those and seeing what works in your community and what people are motivated by. And as Carly said, we'll be doing the pre-day before the conference, and we'll go into more detail and show some more examples of the types of things we're testing on a regular basis. So with that, Trish, I'll turn it over to you if you have any closing comments or want to open it up for questions.
Super. Thank you, Barb. We will open it up for questions. I just wanted to say that if any of these key messages or examples that these two great ladies have shared resonate for you and you want more, and you're thinking about coming to the conference or have registered for the conference, please come and join us on the day before the conference begins, that Wednesday, July 24th, for an all-day workshop. There is an additional charge, $50, but the value for money you will get for that is pretty extraordinary. We begin the morning with Barb and Carly taking you through not just direct mail, but the whole idea of creating an annual plan and this amazing workbook that they've created and updated just for this workshop. That'll be online. You'll get that access to that actually in advance. And then we bring you back after some lunch groups for top 10 things you should be doing now in digital fundraising with the head of our digital pyramid, Amy Starnes. And then in the afternoon, we have a wonderful panel comprised of one of our key major gift officers, one of our plan giving officers, and then one of our foundation gurus. Because, you know, foundations are comprised of individuals too, and working with them to build relationships is just as critical as building relationships with individual donors. So the whole day is really focused around individual giving. And I think those of you that have joined us for some of the previous webinars are well aware that in the United States, individuals comprise almost 80% of our philanthropic dollars. We love our foundations, we love our corporations, but in terms of sustainability, individuals are where it's at. So that's why we're devoting a whole day to different tactics in individual giving, and we'd love to have you come and join us. We've got about 55 people right now. That's large enough to have really good input, but small enough that everyone can get their own individual questions answered. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to check in with us afterwards. And I'll pass the ball back to Rhea to open up for questions.
All right, thank you, Trish, and thank you so much, Barb and Carly. So this is your chance to ask any questions you may have, and as a reminder, you can type them into the questions box there on the panel. The first one we have is actually coming from Natalie, and I think she knows you, Barb and Carly, because she said, miss you guys. This is going back to working kind of with your direct mail firm, and she was wondering, you talked a lot about writing great stories, and hers is, do you have any tricks for talking with a direct mail firm who thinks that they should use more desperation tactics or gimmicky reply device tactics, you know, to increase their response rates? So how would you have that conversation and kind of shifting the direction of your appeals?
Great question. I think you just have to be firm, and you know, you might have to try just putting your foot down and saying, this is our decision, this is our organization, and our, you know, this does not jive with our brand, so we're not going to do that. You could also try coming up with a compromise, see if you could use some of the tactics that they're recommending, but soften up the language a little bit. You could talk about maybe testing a little bit, but not, you know, certainly not going the full-fledged gimmicky route that they're recommending, but maybe you could play with some testing there to see if you can prove out some of your hypothesis there. Barb, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with Carly. Just say, no, that's not the message that we choose to put out into the world. It doesn't fit with our brand and the way we want people to perceive us. The reality is, you may realize short-term gain. It's gonna be at the cost of a long-term relationship, because you're not going to continue to build that trust over time. It's going to always be crisis or emotional giving that isn't gonna, it's gonna erode eventually. The same with gimmicky things. You know, Best Friends does very little with premium offers because we don't want to be like some other animal welfare organizations that are trying to hook people in with merchandise that's completely unrelated to the brand. Those types of donors we call them tippers. They tend to have a very low value, and they tend to just be writing a check because they feel guilty that you've sent them something, and they feel like they have to send something back to offset the cost. But they're not going to be good, solid, long-term supporters that are going to continually give without expecting something. You don't want a quid pro quo relationship. You want people who are in it for the mission and doing it because they think you're a good investment and you're bringing about positive change.
All right, thank you so much, guys. The next question we have is coming from Deb, and she was wondering, how do I start the search for direct mail lists?
So we work with an agency. There are list brokers out there, which you can Google. There are a number of them, and you could contact them directly. You can buy lists from other animal welfare organizations with similar mission to you for a one-time use. The cost varies. It could be anywhere from, $75 to $150 per thousand. Most of the time there are minimum purchase requirements. So I know with some smaller organizations, it's not that cost effective because, they may only find that there's a couple thousand people even worth mailing to in their community where they want to focus, but there's a $500 minimum purchase, for example. So that brings the cost per thousand up high very quickly and makes it a hard ROI because you're going to lose money on acquisition mailings initially anyway. Typically takes anywhere from about 2 years to 3 years to recoup the investment once you are able to resolicit people once they join your organization. But yeah, I mean, oftentimes we advise smaller organizations to look for other places where they can find lists in their community that may be free. You might be able to get a voter list, or you might be able to partner with a local pet store that has a loyal purchaser list, and they might be willing to send out something on your behalf if you have a compelling offer that they want to help support you on. So try to be creative with stuff like that because it can get expensive to buy lists. And if you're focused on a fairly small geographic area, oftentimes it's difficult to make that investment work at the costs that you'd have to pay.
Great. Thank you. And that actually did cover the other question we had, which is, ideas other than buying or renting a list. So we got a 2-for-1 answer on that one.
Well, and I actually have a follow-up to that, Rhea. I think out on the digital community, there's another presentation about building your fundraising list. There are lots of creative ideas about how to build your base of support without actually having to pay for lists. So check that out and send us follow-up questions once you have a chance to look at that.
Great. And for those of you who aren't sure where to find existing resources like that, they are housed on our website now, which is network.bestfriends.org/resources. And you can find them within the webinars section. And if you go through there, you can look back at the archive. And then we also have our webinar series from last year, and that's where you can go through and really find those. We also have a fundraising section, which is where you'll find the recording for this particular webinar as well. So definitely go and check those out. And if you do have any questions after today, you can always reach out to us at bfnetwork@bestfriends.org. And just because we are running short on time here, I want to make sure we get to our remaining ones. So this next one, short bit of background from Kim and then the question. So she says, we are a spay and neuter program that focuses on pet parents with limited income. So the local animal shelters and rescue groups are experiencing a high intake as never before seen. And she was wondering, they have a recent mega adoption event with several groups that have had few adoptions. So how would you recommend they write their stories, since they don't necessarily have an animal specific story? So how would you go about doing that without a particular animal or photos?
Well, I wonder if you could start with one of those pet parent families, of course, while protecting their privacy, but maybe there's a great story you could tell about one of the families or a few families who benefited from those services, and in turn, it helped an animal. You could also build out, that larger problem that you referenced here in the question, that the local shelters are experiencing this never before seen influx of animals, and we need you on board. We really need your help. Make sure they understand the urgency again without that desperation. Barb, any thoughts there?
No, I think those are good suggestions, Carly. Ultimately, we do want to try to relate it to an animal if possible. But I think that's a nice way to do it if you can go through the family and find a family that has been served and be able to kind of paint the story about what their extended pet family looks like and animals that they've been able to help. I think that's a great way to drill in there.
Perfect. Like really honing in on that individual, like you guys were explaining before, versus just a broad amount of numbers and making it personable. So our last question we have in here right now is a design question. You showed the layouts of the letters and really the high points and how to do the design of it. And Natalie was wondering what your thoughts are on including a photo of the letter signer. So maybe it's like the CEO, for example. Is that necessary, or does it take away from the focus of the animal?
I don't think it's necessary. We haven't done that before. I see it a lot more in email, and I think it can be very effective in email. Don't know as much. Barb might have some industry knowledge that I don't on tests, but I don't think it would necessarily take away. Barb, have you ever tested this before?
No, I can't say that I have. I mean, the only place where we really put Julie's photo is in the calendar, but that accompanies sort of her letter that's in the intro page inside the front binder of the calendar. We don't usually put her photo too broadly in appeal letters. It's worth testing. I mean, it may help build trust if you can create the image that that person is, trustworthy and is doing a good job and creating change. But yeah, I wouldn't obviously make that the focus of the letter. You definitely want the animal to have a more predominant place than the person.
All right, great. Thank you, Barb and Carly. And it looks like that was our final question, and we happen to be at the top of the hour as it is. If you do have any questions that come up after this moment here, please jump into our Facebook group. You can always post a question in there. We have a wealth of knowledge within our entire partner organization, so please do feel free to post questions in there. You can email us at bfnetwork@bestfriends.org. We are definitely here to support you. Check out the website, look at those previous resources, and keep an eye out tomorrow for the follow-up email, which will include some extra resources from Barb and Carly, as well as the recording. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much, Barb and Carly. It was a great presentation, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.